One moment Lady Maribel Thorne was gliding across the lake terrace in pale blue silk, smiling as if the moon herself had personally approved her cheekbones. The next moment a white blur launched out of the reeds with the speed and moral certainty of a thrown spear. The Swan hit the terrace stones with both black feet, wings spread wide, neck arched like a judgment from an old god. Lady Maribel screamed. The Swan screamed louder. It seized the blue silk ribbon from her hat, yanked hard enough to tilt the hat over one eye, and then chased her in a perfect circle around the tea table while 14 noble families, 6 council members, 8 guards, and the Alpha King of the Northern Vale watched in horrified silence. From the rose border, where she had been trimming frost-browned stems and trying very hard to be invisible, Mira Val heard the Swan say, clear in her head, "Too much perfume, too little sincerity. Rejected." Mira's shears froze around a dead rose cane. No, absolutely not. Not today. The royal selection tea had already been unbearable before Aurelius decided to begin formal violence. The lake terrace had been polished until it reflected the pale morning sun. White linen covered the tables. Silver cups shone like small moons. Noble daughters sat in careful clusters, each arranged to look effortless, though Mira had seen 3 practicing their angles in the orangery glass. Mira had been told to stay at the edge of the terrace, finish pruning the winter roses, and avoid drawing attention. She was excellent at avoiding attention. It was one of the few skills the palace had rewarded consistently. Unfortunately, she was also the only person on the terrace who understood why the sacred Swan had just declared war on the royal courtship season. Aurelius abandoned Lady Maribel, who had taken refuge behind an elder's chair, and turned his bright black eyes toward the next candidate. Lady Celestine Valahart had made the mistake of reaching for Alpha King Cassian Draven's teacup. Her smile toward the king was soft, polished, and entirely without warmth. "Your Majesty," she said, leaning forward. "Allow me." Aurelius lowered his head. Mira shut her eyes for half a second. "Do not touch his cup as if the place beside him already belongs to you," the Swan said. Then Aurelius charged. Lady Celestine dropped the cup. Tea scattered across the linen. A councilman made a strangled noise. Aurelius flapped once, rose just high enough to look mythic rather than ridiculous, and snapped his beak shut on the pearl tassel at Lady Celestine's sleeve. She shrieked. "Get it away from me." "She called me it," Aurelius said. "Disqualified forever." Mira bit the inside of her own cheek to keep from laughing, hard enough that her eyes watered. At the head of the terrace, Alpha King Cassian Draven did not move. That, Mira thought, was the most impressive thing about him. Not his crownless authority, though he wore it like other men wore armor. Not the breadth of his shoulders under the black formal coat embroidered with silver thread. Not the severe beauty of his face, all dark hair, winter gray eyes, and a mouth that seemed designed by someone who did not approve of smiling. No. The impressive thing was that while his sacred Swan dismantled the royal marriage market in front of half the kingdom's old bloodlines, Cassian Draven sat perfectly still. His expression did not change. His left hand, resting near the spilled tea, did curl into a fist. Just once. Inside him, however, his wolf was not still at all. Mira could not hear the king's wolf. She had never been able to hear wolves unless they were fully shifted. And even then only in the blurred, emotional way she heard most animals. But she could feel the edges of a powerful wolf when it pressed close to the surface. Any creature in the garden could. The sparrows had gone quiet. The ducks had retreated to the far bank. Even the peacocks, who normally believed every crisis was improved by their participation, had vanished behind the lemon trees. Something in Cassian's wolf was awake, bright, amused, and deeply interested. That was not comforting. Aurelius released Lady Celestine's tassel with contempt and strutted across the terrace as if he had personally restored order to civilization. Lord Vine, chief speaker of the Royal Council, rose from his chair with a face the color of curdled cream. He was a narrow man with silver hair, long fingers, and eyes that seemed to measure everyone according to how useful they might be. He had arranged the selection tea. Everyone knew it. He had spent weeks filling the palace with noble daughters of excellent breeding, strong alliances, and expressions polished smooth enough to reflect ambition. "Someone control that bird," he snapped. Aurelius turned his head very slowly. "Bird," he repeated. "This man has survived 60 years and learned nothing." Mira made the mistake of making a sound. It was not a laugh. It was barely even a breath. But the terrace had fallen into a silence so tight that even a blade of grass growing would have sounded disrespectful. Cassian's eyes moved. They found her among the roses. Mira's spine went straight. She was holding pruning shears. Her brown work dress was faded at the elbows. Her apron had mud along the hem. A twig had escaped from her braid, and one of her gloves was patched with linen, because the palace gardeners received new gloves only after proving the old ones had died honorably in service. She looked exactly like what she was, the assistant keeper of the lake garden. Low staff, useful when there were weeds, invisible when there were witnesses. The Alpha King looked at her for 3 long seconds. Aurelius followed his gaze. The Swan's entire posture changed. He folded his wings, abandoned the noblewomen, and crossed the terrace. No one stopped him. No one wanted to be next. He passed Lord Vane without sparing him a glance, ignored the gasping ladies, stepped neatly over the spilled tea, and walked straight to the rose border. Mira did not move. She had learned early that sudden movements offended swans, geese, old mares, nervous dogs, and senior gardeners. Aurelius stopped at her muddy boots. In his beak, somehow, was a red rose. Mira had no idea when he had taken it. Possibly during the violence. Possibly before. Aurelius believed in preparation. He set the rose at her feet. The terrace went so still that the lake itself seemed to pause. "There," Aurelius said. "A suitable candidate." Mira stared at the rose. No, she thought. Absolutely not. From the tea table, Lord Vane whispered, "Impossible." Cassian Draven stood. The movement was not dramatic. He simply rose, and the terrace remembered all at once that the selection tea, the council, the noble families, and the sacred Swan existed beneath his authority. The air shifted. Every wolf on the terrace lowered their eyes by instinct, even the ones who disliked doing it. Cassian walked toward Mira. He stopped just beyond the rose border, close enough that she could see the faint line between his brows, the one that suggested he had spent much of his life being disappointed by events and refusing to show it. "Your name," he said. His voice was low, controlled, and carried without effort. Mira curtsied because her knees remembered before her mind did. "Mira Vale, Your Majesty." "You work in the lake garden." "Yes, Your Majesty." His gaze dropped to the rose at her feet, then to Aurelius, who had positioned himself beside Mira like an armed escort. "Why?" Cassian asked. "Has the Royal Swan brought you a rose?" Mira considered several answers. "Because he has better political judgment than your council. Because Lady Celestine called him it. Because he thinks you are surrounded by overdressed liars and has decided to intervene. Because I can hear him, and he knows it, and if I run now, I can probably make it as far as the herb shed before the guards catch me." She said, carefully, "Perhaps he appreciates people who do not mistake him for a duck, Your Majesty." One of the guards coughed. Cassian's mouth did not move. His eyes changed, though, just slightly. The winter gray warmed at the edges, almost too briefly to catch. Aurelius made a deep, satisfied sound. Correct! Basic respect. Rare in this castle. Mira looked down so no one would see her mouth twitch. Lord Vane recovered enough to sweep forward, his robes whispering over the terrace stones. Your Majesty! This is clearly some form of interference. Cassian did not look away from Mira. Interference? The girl has daily access to the lake garden, to the bird, to its feed. It is possible she has trained it to react. Aurelius opened his wings. Mira softly said, I would not recommend calling him trained. Lord Vane's eyes snapped to her. You will speak when addressed. The words landed the way such words always landed when spoken by people who thought staff were furniture with hands. Mira felt the old familiar tightening under her ribs. It was not fear exactly. It was the disciplined effort of becoming smaller. Cassian's gaze moved to Vane. The chief speaker went pale by one careful shade. She was addressed, Cassian said. Nothing in his voice rose. Nothing needed to. Aurelius tilted his head. The tall one improves. Mira looked very hard at a weed between two stones. Cassian glanced back at the Swan. Aurelius has rejected 12 candidates in one morning. 11, Mira said, before she could stop herself. Every eye turned to her. Heat crawled up her neck. She tightened her grip around the pruning shears. Lady Mirabelle was rejected twice, Your Majesty. For one dangerous moment, no one breathed. Then Cassian Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Vale, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was small, controlled, almost accidental, but it was real. Aurelius looked smug enough to be painted on a banner. Lord Vane looked as if someone had poured vinegar into his soul. Cassian said, Mira Vale, until this matter is understood, you will attend Aurelius directly. Mira's heart dropped. Your Majesty, he appears to tolerate you. Tolerate, Aurelius said, offended again. I gave her a rose, Mira swallowed. I already assist Keeper Rowan with the lake beds and the herb terrace. Then your duties will be adjusted. Lord Vine stepped in. Your Majesty, surely a low garden assistant is not suited to direct care of a royal symbol. Cassian's eyes went colder. The royal symbol has just pursued half your guest list into the hedges. Suitability appears to be under review. Several noblewomen pretended not to hear. Mira wished the terrace would open beneath her and swallow her whole, preferably into a quiet root cellar where no sacred swans delivered flowers and no alpha kings looked at her as if she were a question he intended to solve. Cassian bent and picked up the rose. For a heartbeat, Mira thought he meant to hand it back to Aurelius. Instead, he offered it to her. The stem looked impossibly delicate between his fingers. Mira took it because refusing the Alpha King in front of the council seemed like a poor career strategy. Their fingers did not touch. She was grateful for that. She was not sure the morning could survive another incident. See that he is fed, Cassian said. Yes, Your Majesty. And Mira? She looked up. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, but the possibility of one. Do not let him attack anyone else before noon, Aurelius hissed. Mira, who had been trained by 5 years of palace service and a lifetime of hiding impossible things, managed to say, I will discuss restraint with him. This time, Cassian did smile. Barely. But it was enough. By sunset, everyone in the palace knew the Swan had chosen the garden girl. By supper, the story had become the Swan had bowed to her. By the next morning, a kitchen maid told Mira that someone in the West Wing claimed she had arrived at the tea riding on the Swan's back, glowing with moonlight and speaking an ancient language. I was pruning roses, Mira said. The kitchen maid, Elsie, handed her a basket of greens for Aurelius and looked deeply unconvinced. That's what I said. But Berta from laundry says Lady Celestine's maid swears you cursed the tea. If I could curse tea, I would start with the weak mint blend they serve in council meetings. Elsie snorted. Careful. They'll call that evidence. Mira carried the basket through the servants' corridor and out toward the lake. Dawn lay silver over the water. Mist curled at the reeds. The palace rose behind her, all black stone and high windows, beautiful in the way a mountain was beautiful before it buried a village. She had worked in the lake garden for 5 years. She knew where the spring bulbs hid, which path flooded after rain, which guards stepped on seedlings because they did not look down. She knew the ducks preferred oats, the peacocks lied about everything, and the sparrows in the west eaves had a long-running family argument about a missing ribbon. She had never told anyone. Her mother had been a washerwoman in a border village and the only person who had known the truth. When Mira was 7, she had repeated something a crow said about a neighbor stealing eggs. The neighbor had heard, gone white, and called her moon-touched in the tone people used when they meant dangerous. That night, her mother had held Mira's face between damp hands and whispered, "Kindness is safe. Silence is safer." Mira had built her life around that rule. She listened. She helped when she could. She kept quiet. A bird warning her of a loose roof tile, a mare telling her where the burr had lodged beneath a saddle, a hound complaining about a thorn in the orchard. Small things. Useful things. Things no one had to know. Nothing involving the Alpha King. Nothing involving the Royal Council. Nothing involving a sacred swan who believed he was qualified to choose a queen. Aurelius was waiting on the stone steps by the boathouse, immaculate and furious. "Late," he said. "The sun is barely up." "Late in spirit." Mira set the basket down. "Good morning to you, too." He inspected the greens with the grim attention of a judge reviewing treason. "Acceptable. That is generous." "Do not become emotional." She crouched beside the basket and began separating the lake herbs from the palace lettuce. Aurelius watched her hands. "You caused trouble yesterday," she said. "I corrected a governance failure. You attacked guests. I evaluated candidates. With your beak. Efficiently." Mira pressed her lips together. "The council thinks I trained you." Aurelius gave her a look. It was impressive how well a swan could express insult without eyebrows. "No one trains me. I am aware. The tall one is not. The tall one is the Alpha King. He broods near water and forgets to eat when troubled. Tall one is sufficient." Mira should not have laughed. She knew that, but she was alone by the lake. The mist was soft, and Aurelius had just summarized the most powerful man in the kingdom as if he were a damp heron with poor habits. She laughed once, warm and helpless. From behind her, a voice said, "Does he often amuse you?" Mira stood so fast she nearly stepped into the basket. Cassian Draven stood on the path from the palace, dressed not in formal black today, but in a dark gray riding coat, with his hair tied loosely at the nape. Without the full court watching, he looked less like a symbol and more like a tired man who had come outside before breakfast because the walls had grown too close. Which was, she reminded herself, an absurd thing to think about a king. "Your Majesty," she curtsied. "Mira." Her name and his voice did something inconvenient inside her chest. Aurelius looked between them. Good. He remembered it. Mira turned a cough into a small clearing of her throat. He has a strong personality. That is one term for it. Violent tyrant is another, she said before thinking. Cassian looked at the swan. Aurelius lifted his wings slightly, regal and unrepentant. He has never tolerated anyone so quickly, Cassian said. Not even me. You call him royal property in official documents. Cassian's gaze returned to her. Do I? Mira's stomach tightened. Careless. Too careless. She looked down at the greens. The stable boys joke about it. Do they? His tone was mild, but she felt him noticing. Cassian noticed things the way wolves tracked prints on snow. Quietly. Completely. Aurelius bent to the basket. Tell him his documents are insulting. Mira did not. Cassian stepped closer, stopping at a distance that was correct for a king and a garden assistant. Formal. Harmless. It did not feel harmless. The council will continue the selection process, he said. With Aurelius present? That is tradition. Then the council is very brave. This time the smile reached his eyes. It vanished quickly, but Mira had seen it. So had Aurelius, who made a smug sound into the lettuce. Tradition, Cassian said, has become difficult. Tradition often is. You speak as if you have quarreled with it. Mira glanced toward the palace. People like me usually meet tradition when it tells us where not to stand. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, maybe. Or discomfort. The honest kind. People like you, he repeated. Garden staff. Low servants. Anyone whose name is remembered only when something is missing. She had not meant to say so much. Dawn loosened tongues. So did Swans with terrible political opinions. Cassian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, And yet Aurelius remembered you. Aurelius swallowed lettuce. Aurelius has standards. Mira looked at the swan. He notices who refills the winter trough before it freezes. You did that? The ducks complain if I don't. Another silence. Mira's hand stilled in the basket. Cassian's eyes had sharpened. Not cruelly, not accusingly, but enough. The ducks complain, he said. Mira forced herself to pick up the next handful of greens. In their way. And what way is that? The path behind him remained empty. No guards, no council, no witnesses except one swan who was now standing perfectly still with the air of a creature enjoying a play. Mira chose her words with care. Loudly, Cassian studied her face. She met his gaze because looking away would be worse. His eyes were not quite gray in this light. They held a ring of silver near the pupil, pale and cold, but the attention inside them was not cold. It was focused, almost hungry, not for her exactly, but for the truth of her. It was a dangerous thing to be seen by a man who had forgotten how much he wanted truth. Finally, he looked toward Aurelius. Is she right? He asked the swan. Aurelius blinked. Mira forgot how to breathe. Cassian waited with absolute seriousness, as if it were normal to ask a swan for testimony. Aurelius turned to Mira. Tell him yes. Mira stared at him. Tell him, Aurelius said, that the ducks are insufferable, the peacocks are frauds, and the West Fountain tastes like old coins. Mira pressed one knuckle to her mouth. Cassian's eyes narrowed slightly. He said something. He made a noise. And you almost laughed. He makes expressive noises. Mira. Her name again. This time lower. Not an order. Not quite. The safest thing would have been denial. She had survived on denial and silence. But Cassian had defended her on the terrace. He had handed her the rose instead of letting Vane take the moment from her. And he was standing here without guards, asking a swan a question, as if some part of him wanted to believe the world might contain stranger truths than his counsel allowed. She said, very softly, He says the West Fountain tastes like old coins. Cassian looked toward the fountain at the far end of the terrace. It does, he said after a moment. The copper pipe was repaired last winter. Mira closed her eyes. Aurelius preened. Excellent. Progress. Cassian took one step closer. How long? He asked. My whole life. Birds only? Mostly birds. Some animals if they are very clear. Horses are easier than goats. Cats are not easier, but they think they are. That earned another almost smile. And Aurelius? Unfortunately clear. Unfortunately, Aurelius repeated, affronted. Cassian's expression changed. The kingly mask did not fall away. It loosened, just enough for Mira to see the man underneath, and the man looked less shocked than she expected. He looked relieved. I wondered, he said. About me? About him. Aurelius stopped preening. Cassian looked at the lake. He came from the moon sanctuary when I was crowned. The priestess said he would guard the truth of the throne. I was 26. I thought she meant thieves, assassins, politics. Maybe she did. Perhaps, or maybe she meant overdressed women with bad manners. That time he laughed. It was brief, quiet, and startled out of him, but it changed his whole face. For 1 second, the Alpha King of the Northern Vale looked like a man who had not expected the morning to give him anything gentle. Mira felt warmth climb her throat. Aurelius sighed dramatically. There. Was that so difficult? Cassian looked at the Swan. I assume that was at my expense. Mira considered lying. Then she said, a little. Good, he said. At least one of us is entertained. But he was still smiling when he turned back toward the palace. The days that followed settled into a pattern no one named, because naming it would have made it too honest. Cassian came to the lake with fewer excuses each time. At first he asked about water levels, reed growth, falcon bells, and whether Aurelius had eaten. Soon he simply stood by the cottage gate, while Mira sorted herbs or mended feed baskets, listening as if her small knowledge of wings, hooves, and weather mattered to the throne. Aurelius judged every visit. Lake safety, he said one afternoon, while Cassian watched Mira scatter oats. He has crossed battlefields. The pond is not a threat. Mira dropped 3 oats and pretended not to hear. Cassian noticed anyway. He always noticed, but he did not press. That was the dangerous part. Suspicion would have been easier than patience. Instead, he changed bell schedules when she said the falcons were distressed, sent masons when she found a bitter leak in the reeds, and corrected a guard captain whose hounds frightened the ducks. No one had ever made the things she heard feel important before. At the end of the first week, Cassian found her kneeling by the water with both arms wrapped around Aurelius's neck. The Swan had allowed it, which was more astonishing than any court rumor yet invented. He is shaking, Mira said before Cassian could ask. The king's face changed immediately. Ill? Angry? Frightened? He won't say why. Aurelius did not speak in words. His thoughts were a tight knot of images. Silver cup, bitter taste, a hand with rings, a white sleeve, then a blur of Lady Seraphine's perfume, sharp as crushed lilies, then sleep, too deep and wrong. Mira's stomach turned. Someone touched his feed, she said. Cassian crouched beside her, careless of the damp grass. Who? I don't know yet. Yet. She looked at him. He was not questioning whether she knew something impossible. He was asking what she needed to know more. That trust landed harder than suspicion would have. Mira loosened her hold on Aurelius and stood. The birds saw pieces. Not enough. Then gather pieces. Your council will not like that. My council likes very little. Lord Vane already thinks I am manipulating the royal Swan. Cassian's jaw tightened. Mira noticed the flicker of anger and the way he controlled it. A man who could have filled the lake path with command chose instead to keep his voice even. Lord Vane, he said, has mistaken suspicion for intelligence for many years. Aurelius, recovering slightly, lifted his head. True. Put that on a plaque. Mira almost smiled, but the fear in Aurelius had not faded. She spent the next 2 days listening. The lake garden had never been silent, but now every sound felt like a thread. Sparrows near the east terrace had seen a servant in council colors near the feed shed. The ducks remembered a smell like bitter bark. The raven at Cassian's window had watched Lord Vane meet Lady Seraphine beneath the north arch at dusk. They whispered, the raven told Mira from the roof of the boathouse. Humans always whisper when doing ugly things, as if quiet makes a lie smaller. What did they say? Swan must sleep. King must choose. Garden girl must fall. Cold moved through Mira's hands. Anything else? Ringman said after the second selection tea. The second selection tea was 3 days away. Another selection event. Mira took the information to Cassian at once. She found him in the map room with Lord Vane, 2 border commanders, and Lady Seraphine herself. Seraphine stood near the long table in a gown the color of winter cream. She was blonde, elegant, and beautiful enough to make every reflective surface in the room seem intentional. She looked at Mira's work dress, damp hem and wind-tangled braid, with a smile that could cut thread. "Your Majesty," Mira said from the doorway, suddenly aware she had not been invited and that every person in the room outranked her. Cassian looked up. The tension in his shoulders eased before his face changed. Mira saw it. So did Seraphine. That was the problem. "Mira," he said. "Come in." Lord Vane's lips thinned. "This is a military discussion." "Then perhaps we should all be grateful I am not asking you to contribute to it," Cassian said. One commander suddenly became fascinated by a map pin. Mira stepped inside. "I found something concerning near the feed shed." Vane moved before she could say more. "Again with the Swan." "Your Majesty, this cannot continue. The girl has been given unusual access, and now every disruption conveniently increases her own importance." Cassian's eyes cooled. "Careful." Seraphine set down her cup. Lord Vane speaks bluntly, but not without reason. The palace is full of rumors. People are frightened. They say she speaks to the bird. "People say many things," Cassian said. "And if they are right?" The room held its breath. Mira's pulse thudded in her throat. Seraphine looked at her with soft, lethal concern. "Then we must ask whether the royal swan's strange behavior is sacred judgment or a servant girl's trick." "Do you have an accusation to make?" Cassian asked. "I have a concern." "Concerns are often accusations in better clothes." Seraphine flushed, but only slightly. Vane placed both hands on the map table. "Then, let us be plain. At the second selection tea, the council will request a formal inquiry into the garden assistant's influence over Aurelius. If she is innocent, she has nothing to fear." Aurelius was not in the room, but Mira could hear his voice in memory. Humans always say that before giving you something to fear. Cassian stood very still. Power gathered around him, not released, but present. Every wolf in the room felt it. Mira saw one commander lower his head. She also saw Vane's satisfaction. He wanted Cassian to react, wanted him to protect her too publicly, too fiercely, so the council could call it proof that the garden girl had compromised the king. Mira understood then. The trap was not only for her. She spoke before Cassian could. A formal inquiry would be wise. Cassian looked at her sharply. Vane blinked. Seraphine's smile faltered. Mira folded her hands in front of her apron so no one would see them shake. "Aurelius is a royal symbol. If the council believes his behavior has been influenced, the matter should be examined publicly." Cassian's gaze held hers. "Do not save me yet," she thought, though he could not hear her. "Let them speak where everyone can hear them." His jaw worked once. Then he sat. "Very well," he said. "At the second selection tea, the council may ask its questions." Vine smiled. Mira did not. She spent the next 3 days building a case out of feathers, mud, bitter herbs, and gossip from creatures no court had ever considered witnesses. It was not simple. Birds did not tell stories in straight lines. They remembered light, scent, motion, fear. A sparrow could describe a hand, but not a name. A duck knew the taste of sedative in water, but not who poured it. The raven knew Vine's ring because he liked shiny things and hated the man's voice. Aurelius remembered enough to be furious, but the drug had blurred the edges. Mira wrote everything down in the back of an old seed ledger. She did not sleep much. On the night before the inquiry, Cassian came to the cottage door. Mira opened it with ink on her fingers, and her seed ledger spread across the table behind her. Feathers, reed samples, and herb scrapings lay in careful rows. The hearth smoked. Aurelius stood outside the window like a white shadow with opinions. "Let me stop this," Cassian said. "No." His jaw tightened. "Mira, if you stop it before they speak, they will say I hid behind you. I need them to make the accusation where everyone can hear it. Then I need them to watch it collapse." He looked as if every instinct in him hated that answer. But he listened. That mattered more than comfort. "What do you need?" he asked. "Let me answer first, even if they insult me, especially then." For a long moment, the king and the wolf inside him fought a silent battle. Then Cassian nodded once. "I will let you answer first," he said. "But if they threaten you, the next answer is mine." Aurelius called through the window. "Accept. He needs one boundary or he will chew furniture." Mira closed her eyes. Cassian looked toward the glass. "He is advising you. Strongly. Against me? Unfortunately, in your favor." The corner of Cassian's mouth moved, and the fear in the cottage loosened just enough for Mira to breathe. The second selection tea drew twice the crowd of the first. No one admitted they had come for scandal. They came for tradition, for royal duty, for concern about the sacred order of the throne. But their eyes shone with the hungry brightness of people hoping to witness a fall. The lake terrace had been arranged like a court. Council members sat beneath the white canopy. Noble families lined the steps. Palace staff stood along the garden walls, pretending not to be invested. Guards formed a silent ring around the terrace. Aurelius floated in the lake near the bottom step, outwardly serene. Inside Mira's mind, he was swearing at everyone. "Ring man! Perfume woman! Coward in green! That one called me a decorative goose last winter." Remember him. Mira stood alone in the center of the terrace. She wore her cleanest work dress. Elsie had pressed it for her and muttered darkly about noblewomen who feared poultry. Keeper Rowan had given her new gloves. Someone had left a small bunch of lake lavender on her cottage doorstep, with no note. Cassian sat at the head of the council table. He wore black again, not court black, judgment black. His face was unreadable, but his eyes found hers the moment she stepped forward. Mira breathed. Lord Vane rose. "Mira Vale," he said, voice carrying across the terrace. "You have been granted unusual access to Aurelius, sacred Swan of the Draven line, guardian symbol of the Northern Vale throne. Since that access began, the Swan has behaved in ways that disrupted royal tradition, humiliated noble houses, and influenced the Alpha King's selection process." Aurelius murmured, "Improved it." Mira kept her face still. "Do you deny," Vane continued, "that the Swan behaves differently with you than with others?" "No." A murmur moved through the crowd. Vane's eyes sharpened. "You admit it." "I admit he behaves differently with me." "And why is that?" Mira looked at Aurelius. He looked back. "Because I listened to him." The murmur became louder. Lady Seraphine, seated in a place of honor, leaned toward the woman beside her with a carefully shocked expression. Vane lifted one hand. "You claim to listen to a swan." "Yes." "As one might listen to tone and behavior?" Mira thought of her mother's hands on her shoulders. "Kindness is safe. Silence is safer." Then she thought of Cassian standing in her smoky cottage saying, "You listen to them." "No," she said, "as one listens to words." The terrace erupted. Vane let it rise, then lifted both hands for silence like a man conducting music he had written. "There we have it," he said. "By her own admission, she claims supernatural influence over the royal swan." Cassian's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. Mira saw it. So did Vane. She spoke quickly. "Hearing is not influence. A convenient distinction. An important one. Can anyone verify this ability?" "The birds can." Several nobles laughed. Aurelius rose from the water and stepped onto the lower stair. The laughter died unevenly. Mira felt her fear settle into something clearer. 3 days ago, she said, someone placed sedative herbs in Aurelius's feed and water. Lady Seraphine's hand froze around her cup. Vane's expression did not change. He was better than that. A desperate counter-accusation, he said. The mixture included sleepthorn, bitter willow, and crushed moonseed. One of the palace healers, standing near the servants, frowned. Vane waved a hand. Any gardener might know herbs. The sedative was carried in a silver cup from the east service corridor. It was poured near the feed shed after sunset. A man wearing council colors held it. Murmurs again. Vane's eyes hardened. "You saw this?" "No." "Then your claim is worthless. The sparrows saw the cup. The ducks tasted the water. The raven at the north arch saw you meet Lady Seraphine at dusk." The terrace went cold. Seraphine stood. "This is outrageous!" Aurelius hissed from the stair. Mira turned toward her. "The raven said you wore white sleeves and smelled of crushed lilies. He remembered because he disliked both." Someone in the crowd made an involuntary sound. Seraphine's face flushed. "You insolent little liar!" Vane struck the table with his palm. "Enough. This is precisely the danger. She uses birds and riddles to smear noble bloodlines." Mira reached into her apron pocket and drew out a folded cloth. Her hands were no longer shaking. "Then we do not need riddles." She unfolded the cloth on the table before the council. Inside lay a pinch of dried herb residue, a stained reed, and a small silver thread. The residue was scraped from Aurelius's feed tray. The reed came from the water beside it. The thread caught on the feed shed latch. "The palace healer can test the herbs." The healer stepped forward before anyone invited him. He was an older wolf named Master Elian, who had once thanked Mira for finding his lost spectacles after a robin complained they were blinding the mint bed. He smelled the residue. His expression changed. "Slepthorn," he said. Vane's mouth flattened. Elian rubbed the reed between his fingers and touched it to his tongue. "Bitter willow and moonseed, unless my tongue has retired without informing me." The terrace shifted from spectacle to alarm. Cassian stood. Mira looked at him quickly. He remained silent, letting her answer first. The trust steadied her. "The remaining vial," Mira said, "is not in my cottage, though Lord Vane's men searched there this morning." That was a risk. She had not known for certain until Vane's eyes flickered. "Good. It is not in Lady Seraphine's rooms, though she expected it to be removed before noon." Seraphine went still. "It is with the man who carried the cup. He was told to keep the rest for later." Vane laughed once. "And where is this imaginary man?" Aurelius stepped fully onto the terrace. No one moved. The sacred swan crossed the stones with slow, terrible dignity. He did not rush this time. He did not flap. He did not hiss. He walked past the council table, past Seraphine, past 2 guards, and stopped before a young council attendant standing at the far edge of the canopy. The attendant's face drained of color. Aurelius looked up at him. "Pocket," he said. Mira pointed. "His inner left pocket." The attendant bolted. He made it 3 steps. Cassian moved. He did not shift. He did not need to. One moment he stood at the head of the table, the next the attendant was on the stone beneath the grip of the Alpha King, pinned without injury and without hope. The terrace gasped as one creature. Cassian held out his free hand. "Search him," he said. A guard pulled a small, dark vial from the attendant's inner left pocket. The healer took it, opened it, and did not need more than a breath. The same mixture, stronger and unused. The silence after that was enormous. Vane recovered first. A planted vial. "This proves nothing." The attendant broke. Some men confessed because guilt overcame them. Some because their courage failed. This one confessed because Aurelius climbed onto his stomach and sat there with calm, sacred menace. "Lord Vane gave it to me," the attendant blurted. "He said only to make the Swan sleep, only to stop the attacks. Lady Seraphine said the king would choose properly once the bird stopped interfering." Seraphine whispered, "Fool!" Everyone heard. Vane's composure cracked at last. "You ungrateful worm!" Cassian rose from the attendant and turned. The full force of him settled over the terrace. Wolves lowered their heads. Humans stepped back. Even the air seemed to bow. "Lord Vane," he said. Vane opened his mouth. "Do not." One word. The old councilman closed his mouth. Cassian looked at the gathered nobles, the council, the servants along the wall, and finally at Mira. Something in his expression changed when he looked at her. The king remained. But the man was there too, and he did not hide. "This council arranged a selection tea to advise its king," he said. "Instead, its chief speaker drugged the sacred symbol of my line, framed a member of my household, and attempted to force a political marriage by fraud." Vane found his voice. "Your Majesty, be careful. She has admitted to hearing animals. We do not know what she is." Cassian's eyes went silver cold. "We know exactly what she is." Mira's breath caught. He stepped toward her. Not in front of her. Beside her. That mattered. Mira Vale listened when the rest of us used Aurelius as a symbol and forgot he was a living creature. She heard a truth this council tried to bury. She brought evidence. She stood before wolves who outrank her and answered without hiding behind my protection. His voice lowered, but carried more clearly for it. She is not a curse. She is not a trick. She is the reason treason failed on this terrace. Aurelius gave a low, approving sound. Finally, a useful sentence. Mira's mouth trembled. Cassian glanced at the Swan. "I assume he approves." "Unfortunately," Mira whispered. "Very much." The corner of his mouth moved. Then he turned back to the council. "Lord Vane is removed from office, pending full judgment. Lady Seraphine will remain under guard until her role is examined. The selection process is ended." That caused another wave of shock. An elder rose, trembling with outrage. "Your Majesty! The kingdom requires a queen. The kingdom requires honesty more." "And if the old houses object?" Cassian looked at Mira again. This time there was no mask at all. "They may begin by explaining why a garden assistant showed more loyalty to the throne than they did." Mira felt the world tilt. Not because he defended her, because he had named the truth in front of everyone. The elder sat. Cassian extended his hand toward Mira. Every instinct told her not to take it. Not here. Not under these eyes. The old fear whispered that attention was danger, that silence was safety, that a girl who heard birds had survived by being useful and unseen. But Aurelius stood at her side. The raven was on the canopy, watching with bright eyes. The ducks had gathered near the lower stair. Elsie stood by the servants' wall with both fists pressed to her mouth, and Cassian waited. Not demanding, not claiming, offering. Mira placed her hand in his. Warmth closed around her fingers. Cassian looked at the council and the court and the noble families who had come to watch her fall. From this day, he said, Mira Vale will serve as royal speaker for the creatures and natural wards of the palace. Her testimony will be heard in matters concerning the sacred animals, the lake, and the old sanctuary grounds. Lord Vine, still pale, gave a bitter laugh. You give office to a servant because a swan likes her. Cassian's hand tightened gently around Mira's. No, he said. I give office to the woman who saved the throne from your ambition. Then, quieter, but still loud enough for the first row of counselors to hear, he added, and because Aurelius had better judgment than the council. Aurelius spread his wings. Correct. The inquiry ended in fragments. Guards escorted Vine away. Seraphine left without her perfect smile. The attendant wept into his sleeve. The healer took the vial and residue for formal testing. Nobles whispered in knots, adjusting themselves around a new truth they had not planned to accept. The palace staff did not whisper. They looked at Mira differently. That was harder. Not cruelly. Not fearfully, most of them. But with attention. Mira had wanted recognition for perhaps half a heartbeat on the terrace. And now that it existed, she did not know where to put it. She slipped away as soon as she could. No one stopped her. She went to the lake. The late afternoon had softened the water into gold. The terrace behind her still murmured with aftermath, but the lake garden breathed as it always had. Reeds rustled. Sparrows argued. A duck complained that the emotional climate had delayed lunch. Mira sat on the lower step and finally let her hands shake. Aurelius came to stand beside her. You did not faint, he said. High praise. For a human, yes? She laughed weakly. Then the laugh became something else, something that rose from deep in her chest and caught there. Not tears exactly, not relief exactly. The strange ache of having survived a thing by stepping into the open. They know, she whispered. Some know. Some suspect. Some are still stupid. That is also true. The swan leaned against her shoulder, carefully, as if he could pretend it was accidental. Mira rested her cheek against his feathers. My mother thought silence would keep me safe. Aurelius was quiet. She was not wrong, Mira said. Not entirely. Silence did keep me safe, but it also kept everything small. The lake moved in little rings of light. I don't know how to be seen. Aurelius tucked his head slightly. Begin badly. Improve. Mira laughed through the ache. Footsteps came down the path. She knew them now. Cassian did not speak until he reached the step above her. May I sit? It was such an absurd question from a king on his own terrace that she looked up. He was entirely serious. Yes, she said. He sat beside her on the stone, close enough that his shoulder almost touched hers, not close enough to crowd. For a while, they watched the lake. Aurelius inspected the distance between them and muttered, Still too formal. Mira covered her mouth. Cassian's eyes flicked to her. He is judging. Constantly. Me? Usually. Fair. The small answer eased something in her. He looked different in the lowering light. Tired. Yes. Anger still held in the line of his jaw, but the terrible, controlled distance he wore in court had faded. He was a man beside a lake, his sleeve brushing the stone, his hand resting open on his knee like he was trying not to reach for something without permission. You kept your promise, she said. I nearly failed, but you didn't. When Vane called you a trick, my wolf wanted his throat. Mira turned to him. He did not look proud of it. He looked honest. And you? I wanted to let you finish. Her chest warmed. Thank you. Do not thank me for doing what you asked. That is a low standard. It is not as common as it should be. He accepted that with a small nod. Another quiet settled, deeper than the first. Then Cassian said, When I was crowned, the Moon Priestess told me Aurelius would guard the truth of the throne. I spent years thinking truth was a thing to extract from enemies, documents, treaties. The Swan made a thoughtful sound. Today, Cassian continued, a woman in a work dress stood before my council and reminded me truth also lives in things we ignore, because they do not speak our language. Mira looked at the water because looking at him was suddenly too much. Birds are rarely concise. Neither are counselors. Birds are more useful. I am beginning to agree. Aurelius gave a satisfied hiss. Cassian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I ended the selection process. I heard. Good. The council will pressure you to start again. They may pressure the lake. It will have similar effect. Mira smiled despite herself. Cassian! He looked at her when she said his name. The softness in his face almost undid her. I am still a garden girl, she said. Yes. I do not know court dances. Good. I dislike most of them. I have mud on my hems. Aurelius has pond mud on his feathers from sitting on Lord Vane's attendant. Yours is preferable. I talk to birds. I have noticed. Some people will never stop thinking that makes me strange. Cassian turned fully toward her then. Mira, I am a man who becomes a wolf beneath the moon and rules a kingdom, partly because my ancestors made promises to a goddess no one has seen in centuries. Strange is not the problem. She blinked. Aurelius said, Good. Very good. Continue. Cassian looked briefly at the Swan. I am not taking coaching. Mira laughed. He heard it, and whatever he had been about to say changed, became simpler. I do not want a queen chosen by fear, bloodline, or council arithmetic, he said. I do not need a woman who smiles when I am wrong, because correcting a king is inconvenient. I need someone who listens. Someone who tells the truth, even when her hands shake. Someone who sees the living thing beneath the symbol. Mira's throat tightened. That is a great deal to put on a garden assistant. Then I will put nothing on you. He reached out, slow enough for refusal. His fingers brushed the back of her hand. I am telling you what I know, not asking for an answer you are not ready to give. The old part of her, the careful part, waited for fear to close around the moment. It did not. There was fear. Yes. Fear of attention. Fear of change. Fear of stepping so far out of silence that she would never find her way back. But there was also Cassian's hand, warm and steady beside hers. Aurelius at her shoulder, pretending not to be invested. The lake holding moonlight before the moon had fully risen. Mira turned her hand palm up. Cassian's fingers slid between hers. Aurelius released a long sigh. At last, the kingdom survives. Mira pressed her lips together. Cassian's thumb moved once across her knuckles. What did he say? That the kingdom survives. Because I held your hand? He has a generous view of his own influence. I see. He also believes he chose me. He did bring you a rose. He stole that rose from Lady Maribel's hat. A sound political beginning. Mira laughed again, and this time Cassian laughed with her. It was low, real, and unguarded enough that 2 ducks startled off the lower step. The weeks after the inquiry were not simple, but they were honest. Lord Vane's removal uncovered letters, payments, and quiet pressure placed on minor houses. Cassian dealt with the rot precisely, while Mira stood in council not as decoration, but as witness. Some nobles adjusted because her reports prevented poisoned feed, sick falcons, and old sanctuary wards from failing. Others resisted until Aurelius chased Elder Bram into the West Fountain, after he called her the Bird Girl. After that, Bram used her name. Cassian came to the lake without excuses now. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes he read beside her while she sorted herbs. Sometimes they sat in silence until the palace felt far away, and the crown no longer seemed to weigh so heavily on his shoulders. One moonlit evening, Mira found him by the water with Aurelius beside him. "Are you two having a council?" she asked. Cassian looked almost caught. I asked whether he truly knew. "Knew what?" Aurelius lifted his head. "That you were his mate. I said he became happier whenever you called him wrong." Mira laughed softly. Cassian did not deny it. "My wolf knew at the first tee," he said. "I argued with him for days. He said I should stop standing like a decorative wall." Her laughter came harder then, warm enough to break the last of his restraint. He smiled at her without hiding it. "Mira," he said, "I will not make this another public test. But I want you to know what is true. You are my mate. Not because Aurelius attacked half the nobility. Not because the court needs a tidy story. Because when I am with you, I am not only the throne or the wolf or the man everyone faces for judgment. I am myself. Somehow, with you, that feels like enough." She could not answer at once. All her life, her gift had been a door she kept closed. Cassian looked at that door as if it led somewhere worth entering. "I do not know how to be a queen," she whispered. "I know. I will make mistakes. I may laugh at the wrong moment, because a swan says something unforgivable. The court will talk. The court breathes, therefore it talks." Her smile trembled. "You make it sound simple." "No," he said. "I make it sound chosen." She stepped into his arms, and he held her as if power could be gentle when it finally had somewhere safe to rest. The kiss that followed was quiet, under the moon by the lake, with no council watching and Aurelius pretending not to observe. "Acceptable," the Swan said after 4 seconds. Mira laughed against Cassian's chest. "Approval?" he asked. "The highest kind." Spring came slowly. Mira was given the old sanctuary room overlooking the lake as her office, though it contained more perches than chairs. Servants came to her with warnings from hounds, falcons, ravens, and horses. Counselors learned that truth could arrive on wings. Cassian read every report she wrote. On the first warm evening, the palace held a lake supper, not a selection tea. Cassian had banned the phrase so thoroughly that even the ducks seemed to avoid it. Mira wore a green gown the color of reeds after rain. Cassian saw her across the terrace and stopped mid-sentence. Aurelius, wearing a ceremonial wreath he despised, said, "Good. He has eyes." Cassian crossed to her and offered his arm. No one gasped this time. Some watched, but curiosity was not contempt, and attention was not always danger. They walked to the water as lanterns glowed in the trees. "What does he say?" Cassian asked when Aurelius sighed from the shore. Mira leaned lightly against him. "He says he supposes I may keep you." Generous of him. "And you?" Mira looked at the lake, the palace, the Swan, and the man who had chosen to stand beside her, instead of in front of her. She thought of the silence that had protected her, and of the larger, stranger life that had opened when she finally spoke. "I say home is louder than I expected." Cassian kissed her temple. Aurelius tucked his head under one wing. "At last! Peace!" Then a raven dropped a stolen spoon into Lord Bram's soup. The ducks began a territorial argument beneath the dessert table. and Aurelius opened one eye. "Temporary peace," he corrected. Mira laughed. Cassian laughed with her. Beside the lake that had witnessed fear, scandal, truth, and choice, Mira understood that listening was not a curse and not a trick. Listening was love when it made room for the unheard. Listening was power when it brought hidden truth into the light. And sometimes, if the moon was feeling mischievous, listening was a sacred swan attacking 12 noblewomen so one garden girl could finally be seen. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more cozy supernatural romance, moonlit secrets, and unforgettable Alpha King love stories. See you in the next one.